I was working at a newspaper there in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and I was working there when 9/11 occurred and watched the buildings fall down while at the paper on the AP news feed, which was, as I'm sure all of you know, a very disturbing episode in American history. A very troublesome thing occurred just about 70 miles down the road that evening. And in the entertainment district, there was a Cherokee Indian who was assaulted because he looked Arabic. Now think of the irony there. So you have a Cherokee, an indigenous American, being assaulted for being from elsewhere and associated with the folks who brought down World Trade Center. That night, after seeing that, I wrote another satirical tune, which a lot of people have seen as simply a sequel to Whiskey Gun that I just played. It becomes almost a parody. It's called Talking Arab Blues. Things are getting knocked down, getting blown up. Who in the world could be so corrupt? Turn on the TV and get the whole truth. Turns out it's them evil, ruthless Arabs. Hell, I should have known it. Well, I don't know much about Arabs except for darker than me, so they must be bad. There's a funny religion, a bunch of them follow. They worship a fella by the name of Allah. Kind of like God, only darker. Now there's a book called the Koran the Arabs read. It teaches them how to do evil deeds like murder Jews, hijack planes, all kinds of dastardly things that absolutely no American, not even the CIA, would ever think of doing. Now don't get me wrong, I'm a Christian man, but I went out and bought myself a Koran. Know thy enemy, that's what I say. I figured I'd get inside the brain of an Arab. How hard could that be? Well, I opened it up to no particular page. Read a lot like my old King James. Same old people, same old stories. I guess originality is not the forte of the Arab. Well, the more I read, the madder I got, because I couldn't find nothing about no terrorist plot. It became obvious I'd been took. Hell, it's plumb un-American to censor a book. That's what someone had gone and done to my Koran. And so I got on the internet to find out more. Turns out the Arabs is always at war. They took Jerusalem, took over Spain, and that's when the brainwash first began by the Arabs. You see, modern medicine, that's all their fault. You can blame them for pepper, blame them for salt. They made all of Europe take a bath and made them count with numbers. There's one thing I absolutely, positively cannot stand. It's math. Well, they turned Constantinople into Istanbul, but they can't turn me. I ain't no fool. I set out like every American should to destroy every Arab thing I could. Look out, you crazy Arabs, here I come. Here's what I done. Well, I ran around town with a baseball bat, took out every Persian cat, burned down every schoolhouse teaching math, and I've gone 3 weeks now without a bath. That'll teach them. Well, I hated to do it. What the heck? Burned all my old Cat Stevens records, blew up every hospital that I could find, and I even burned down the Bedouin shrine. Them fellas dress an awful lot like Arabs. Well now, people, I just found out today there's already Arabs right here in the US of A. We gotta do what's right, kick them all out, because that's what this country's all about. Freedom from Arabs. God bless America. You see what's going on there with the satire is sort of taking the place of the other, and that sort of explains what Burke had said about it. That in a lot of ways you are recognizing the temptations and the weaknesses in the other that exist in oneself. It presents the other as a human, as opposed to being the embodiment of evil, as someone who can actually be debated with and an argument presented, as opposed to just being opposed and for one to just hope for their destruction. Now, where this becomes important and where this becomes ethically applicable to democracies is in the theories of a woman named Chantal Mouffe, who is a Belgian democracy theorist who teaches in London. She used almost identical language that Burke uses in opposing the tragic frames and the comedic frames in her theory of antagonism and agonism in a democratic government. And for her, antagonism is very much like the way Burke describes the tragic frame. And agonism is very much like the way Burke described the comedic frame. They are writing, of course, 60 years apart. She was writing this in the 90s. But according to Mouffe, it's very important to engage in agonism as opposed to antagonism. She says that antagonism perceives a political opponent as being evil, as being someone who should be destroyed. That the other is not so much a competitor, but is in fact an impediment, and that particular view should be destroyed. Agonism, on the other hand, recognizes the other as a political opponent with whom one should argue. And so you can see how this really privileges my area of study, rhetoric, because rhetoric, which has long been considered, as Dr. Green knows, long been considered the handmaiden of democracy, is the method by which we argue and present our views, because democracy requires a winner and a loser. And Mouffe believes this strongly, in that when one loses, then one should perfect one's argument. The danger, she says, and I agree, has actually been exemplified in some of the countries that used to be in the Soviet Union and are now working with attempting forms of democracy, where the extreme right has been marginalized from participation in government and not allowed a voice. And as she points out, what this has tended to do is provide them only one way out. And if they cannot participate in governmental discourse, they tend to go to violence. And therefore, allowing competing arguments is the preferred ethical stance, she believes, very similar to Burke's view on the comedic frame. So you can see how this is very important. And in the United States, as we deal with things like, I think a great example would be perhaps the way a lot of folks tend to talk about the Tea Party. Whether you agree with them or not, they are not an element that should simply be discarded or marginalized from political discourse, but in fact allowed a voice, because it's always better to argue against someone than to put them in a position where they have no choice but to engage in violence. And so you can see how this antagonistic / tragic ethical perspective is placed against the more preferable agonistic comedic ethical perspective. And I certainly would hope that in our country that we would we would engage in political discourse in more of an agonistic and comedic frame. But as you all know, if you have a Facebook account, that isn't the way we quite often talk. It's not just music where these things emerge, of course. There are some great examples of satire in the United States right now, and I think one of the best is South Park, which is a cartoon. But they tend to engage in more of a comedic frame, and they tend to engage in satire to represent that comedic frame, and they do it so well, and often even recognize when they're doing it and point out how, as Burke said, the satirist is often attacking the weaknesses and the temptations that in the other that the satirist has within him or herself. I want to leave you today with a song from, I think, one of the greatest rhetorical critics of all time, Johnny Cash. And it's a song about the dangers of folks engaging in a more tragic frame, or to use the Muthian term, a more antagonistic frame. There once was a musical troupe, singing, picking folk group, sang the mountain ballads and the folk songs of our land. They were long on musical ability. Folks said they would go far, but political incompatibility led to their downfall. Cause the one on the right was on the left and the one in the middle was on the right. The one on the left was in the middle, and the fellow in the rear was a Methodist. This musical amalgamation toured the entire nation, playing traditional ballads and the folk songs of our land. They played with musical virtuosity. Folks said they were the rage, but political animosity prevailed upon the stage. Where the one on the right was on the left and the one in the middle was on the right. The one on the left was in the middle, and the fella in back, he burned his driver's license. Well, the curtain had ascended, a hush fell on the crowd, as thousands there gathered to hear the folk songs of our land. But they took their politics seriously in that night in the concert hall, as the audience watched deliriously, the band had a free-for-all. And the one on the right was on the bottom, and the one in the middle was on the top. The one on the left had a broken arm, and the fella in back said, "Oh crap." So take this as a lesson. If you plan to start a folk group, don't go mixing politics with the folk songs of our land. Just practice harmony and diction, play your banjo well, and if you have political convictions, keep them to yourself. Cause the one on the left works at a bank, and the one on the middle drives a truck. The one on the right is an all-night DJ, and the one in the rear, well, he got drafted.